How's it going, you awesome bunch of bakers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome back to another video. Today we're making cheese and bread again, so let's get in the kitchen and get started. This type of cheese is quite common in some Eastern European countries, and we have made something similar in the past, when I show you how to make the unique midsummer cheese for my country, Latvia. As it turns out, this type of cheese is also traditionally eaten during Easter in some countries like Ukraine and Slovakia, usually served with sweet enriched bread and slices of cold cuts. And that is what we're making today, Eastern European Easter cheese and a sweet braided Easter loaf. And we're going to use the leftover whey from the cheese making process to make the bread with. This is the fourth cheese and bread project on my channel. I will leave links for the other videos below this one. You will also find a link to a video in which I show you how to make butter and then use the leftover buttermilk to make bread with. But for now, let's get on with this recipe. Let me show you how it's made, starting with the ingredients. For the cheese, you'll need some whole milk. The one I'm using has a fat content of 3.7%. You'll also need some salt, some ground black pepper, and some eggs. And that is where the name comes from, custard cheese, because it contains eggs. For the bread, we'll need some white bread flour, yeast, salt, honey, butter, an egg, vanilla paste or vanilla essence, saffron, raisins, an egg for glazing, and we will need the leftover liquid from the cheese making process. You can customize the cheese and the bread recipes to your taste. Add some herbs or vegetables or seeds to the cheese. Swap the saffron for cinnamon in the bread dough. It's up to you. As for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, a brush. I'm going to bake the bread in a little cake tin. It measures 15 centimeters or 6 inches across and about 6 centimeters or 2.5 inches deep. But you don't need the cake tin, you can make it as a freestanding loaf. For the cheese, we'll need a pot and a whisk, and quite importantly, we'll need a cheesecloth for straining the cheese. You can find one of these in my Amazon shop, link down below, along with many other pieces of equipment that I use. With all the ingredients and the equipment out of the way, let's get to it. Let's start by making the cheese. Drop the eggs in a pot and whisk them until they are nice and runny. Next, add the pepper and the salt, whisk again, then pour in the milk and whisk some more. And then bring it over to the hob and place it on medium to high heat. This recipe makes quite a large piece of cheese, so you can halve the ingredients if you want to. If you're gonna make the full amount, it'll take around 10 to 12 minutes of cooking to be ready. Leave it to heat up and whisk it occasionally so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. Once it's heated up, it'll start splitting. Keep cooking it for another minute until it starts resembling scrambled eggs. This is how it should look. Now pour the contents of the pot into a colander set over a bowl and lined with a cheesecloth. Then take all 4 corners of the cloth and twist it up, and then move the colander to an empty bowl. Do not discard the liquid. Once you have moved the colander to an empty bowl, place something flat on top of the cheese and then weigh it down with something heavy. We want to try and squeeze out as much of that liquid as possible. I'm going to be using my cast iron pot for this. Leave the cheese to cool down at room temperature. Immediately, we can move on to the next step. We are going to use the hot whey to our advantage here. Weigh the required amount of liquid needed for the bread recipe, then drop the saffron and the raisins in the hot liquid. The saffron will get to release all its flavor as the liquid is cooling down, and the raisins will become nice and soft. If you decide to add some seeds to this recipe, you can add them to the hot whey at this point too. My kitchen is pretty cool right now, at around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So just about half an hour later, my whey had cooled down. I let it cool down to about 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we'll move on to mixing the dough. Add the melted butter, yeast, salt, egg, vanilla, and honey to the liquid and give it all a very good mix. Then add the final ingredient, the flour, grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. This time I'll go with cold bulk fermentation. If you want to make this bread on the same day, you can. You'll find instructions for that in the written recipe. I prefer cold fermentation because it's easier to fit into my schedule. I usually mix the dough in the evening, then I can continue at any time on the next day. Once you have fully mixed your dough, take its temperature. Around 25 to 26 degrees Celsius is just about right for this, which is 77 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're going to cold ferment it, cover the dough and place it in the fridge to chill down for 30 minutes. If you're doing a room temperature bulk fermentation, leave it out for around 2 to 2.5 hours. Halfway through bulk fermentation, you want to give your dough a fold if you're fermenting at a room temperature. But if you're doing cold bulk ferment, then leave it to chill down for 30 minutes and then give it a fold. But before we do that, here's the cheese, all cooled down and set. It is a little bit delicate, so handle it gently. Now you can cover it up so it doesn't dry out, and leave it in the fridge to cool down completely. Okay, let's move on with the dough. After 30 minutes of chilling, we'll perform the first and only fold. Place the dough on the table upside down, flatten it, and then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle to reach point where you started. then flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, place it back into the bowl. This is a low hydration dough, so I'm covering it with cling film so it doesn't dry out in the fridge, even with the lid. Let it cold ferment for around 18 to 24 hours. It is the next day, the dough has puffed up beautifully. Now we must weigh it, divide it into 4 equal pieces and pre-shape it. You could of course do a 3-strand braid and divide the dough into 3, but I'm making a round loaf, so 4 strands is the way to go. If you've never tried braiding a 4-strand loaf, this will be a great first experience. But before we get to that, let's do the pre-shape. Flatten the piece of dough, cross the 2 sides over in the middle and then roll it up. We're trying to give it a cylinder shape. Once all pre-shaped, cover the dough pieces up and let them rest for 45 minutes. If you are fermenting your dough at room temperature, then 15 minutes will do. Before we move on to the final shaping, let's prep the baking tin by greasing it with butter. Alternatively, you can line it with baking paper. Okay, now it's final shaping time. Take the piece of dough, turn it upside down, place it horizontally in front of you and flatten it slightly. Then fold it back up into a cylinder shape. This extra fold is there to tighten it, it will make it easier to shape. Now roll the piece of dough out to about 30 cm or 1 foot long, and then repeat with the other 3. Make sure to taper the ends as well. To start off the braid, place 2 strands vertically and 2 strands horizontally, creating a square shape in the middle. Make sure that the diagonally opposing corners of the square are crossed over. And if that made no sense, just watch my hands and follow. Okay, once you have a little square with the strands crossed over each other, we can start braiding. Take the strand that is under, fold it to the right to cross the strand that is laying over the other one. Then take the next strand and repeat the same move, going in a clockwise direction. Once you have done this with all 4 strands, repeat the same movements going backwards in the other direction. Finally, take the loose ends and tuck them underneath the loaf. I'm sure I probably made it sound far more complicated than it actually is, but it really is very simple, so just watch my hands and follow. And if you do it correctly, you'll end up with a nice 4-strand braided loaf. Now place it in a cake tin or on a non-stick paper lined baking sheet, cover it up and leave it for the final proof. It took me around 3.5 to 4 hours. If you do the room temperature bulk fermentation, it might take only 2. But regardless, if you want to make it rise quicker, place it in a warmer area. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven to 150 degrees Celsius, 300 Fahrenheit, fan on. And that'll be 170 degrees Celsius or 340 Fahrenheit, fan off. Once the loaf is nice and puffy, it's ready for the oven. But before that, let's glaze it with egg. You can decorate it too if you want. Sprinkle it with some pearl sugar or some sliced almonds perhaps. But once you're done, get that bad boy in the oven. It'll take around 15 minutes to fully bake. Once it's beautifully dark golden brown all over, it's ready. If yours is getting too dark too soon, cover it with some foil to protect it. As soon as it comes out of the oven, remove it from the baking tin, then leave it on the rack to cool down. And there you go, that is another cheese and bread project, and a very tasty one at that. As I mentioned earlier, you can customize these recipes to your taste. Add some caraway seeds or some toasted sunflower seeds to the cheese. Add some chopped fresh herbs like dill or parsley. You could even add some roasted peppers to it. If you're not a fan of saffron, leave it out of the bread. Don't want raisins? Swap them for some nuts. Or make a completely different bread altogether. You can basically swap the liquid of any bread recipe with the leftover liquid from the cheese. But I must say, this bread is definitely worth a try. It is soft, it is rich, the saffron has a wonderful flavor. The soaked raisins make it nice and moist. And while it may seem a little bit strange to make a big fat sandwich with cheese and ham using this kind of bread, it just works so well. And I'm not at all surprised that this is an Easter tradition. Of course, I'm quite sure I butchered the classic recipes, but as you all know, I'm all about making things my own. And I do not care what anyone's grandma used to do, because I'm the one who's going to be eating this. So I'm gonna make it the way I want to make it. And you should definitely do that too. That is why I always tell you to customize things to your taste. Because we are all different and I cannot tell you what's good.